All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to DAO Talk. This is part 3 of our 3-part series on the Tally protocol. We were joined by Raph and Dennison earlier in the series. This week, we're joined by Ben from ScopeLift. Ben, how are you?
Good, Tommy. How you doing? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing well. We're excited to have you on. We've been teasing this episode for a few weeks now. People are ready.
No pressure.
No pressure. But yeah, Ben, I mentioned you're from ScopeLift. I want to get your background, exactly how you got into the space. We try to talk to all our guests to give our listeners a little bit of context on, where you're from, how you've thought about the space, how you got into it. I think it'll help in giving some color to the conversations we're going to have after. So floor is yours.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. Well, my name's Ben DiFrancesco. I'm the founder and lead engineer at ScopeLift, which is what would you call us? I guess like a dev shop or an engineering firm operating in the crypto ecosystem. I am from Philly and live outside of Philly, born and raised in the Philly area. And I got into the space kind of by a circuitous route. My background is in more traditional engineering, specifically in aerospace engineering. So that's what my degree was in. That's what I studied in school. But I was also always a computer nerd, so kind of self-taught programmer from a young age, took a bunch of computer science courses alongside my core degree in school. And then early in my career worked for a couple different engineering firms, aerospace firms, but was always doing software engineering. So in the traditional engineering world, there's like a real need for software developers, especially software developers who know both the engineering side, the traditional engineering side, and the software engineering side. So that's what I was doing. But what I found was that actually the aerospace engineering world, especially at that time, was kind of like slow and boring and very entrenched. You were either working for, one of these big aerospace firms that were very bureaucratic and slow moving, or one of the sort of like ecosystem of contractors and providers that worked around those firms, or you were in academia. And that was really like the only path that was available at the time. Now, interestingly, I think that's changed a bit. And there's like a younger version of me that, gets out of school 10 years later and never leaves the aerospace industry because, I go work for SpaceX or any number of other of these cool companies that are now sort of revitalizing the aerospace industry in a lot of ways. But at the time, really all the energy and innovation was in software engineering. To the point where tech at the time, it's changed a little bit now since then, but tech was really just like synonymous with software in that era when I got out of school. And so I decided to, leave the traditional engineering world and go into software and specifically to work with startups. And that's when I founded ScopeLift, but it was not focused on crypto at the time. What was happening then was that was really just as the curve of smartphone adoption was happening. So everybody was getting iPhones and then Android phones, and all these companies needed an app for the first time ever. And so my ScopeLift started as a native mobile development shop, working with mostly startups, building apps for, in many cases, products that already existed or that they were getting ready to launch and whatnot. Did that for a while, but at the same time that I started ScopeLift, also discovered Bitcoin. And I can never quite remember the first place that I saw it. I think it was actually on a Slashdot post. That's like an old like Reddit style website for nerds, or Hacker News style website. And read the white paper mostly because I said like, well, this doesn't work. You can't have a digital scarce, good that doesn't work. And then I read the white paper and I was like, oh, I think this works. And then basically fell down the rabbit hole. And after that was like constantly playing with crypto stuff, I did some mining for a while. I wrote some software to try to like automate mining and things like this. And then really by 2018, 2019, all of my interests was in crypto, and it had diverged from what my company was doing. So I decided to pivot ScopeLift fully into the crypto space. Had done a little bit of work, but the industry was just starting to actually become an industry. Back in 2012, 2013, there really was no crypto industry. There were a handful of startups that had been funded to do mostly things like, custody and exchanges and things like that. And by 2018 or so, there was actually like an industry. And so in 2019, decided to pivot ScopeLift fully into crypto, wound down all of our legacy contracts, went full on trying to do, biz dev and find clients in the crypto world. And, luckily that has worked out really well. Early in 2020, when we had the COVID crash, It seemed like maybe I had made a huge mistake by, nuking 80% of my business right before an economic crisis. But as we know, like after that, crypto really took off. And of course, there have been ups and downs since then. But we've been lucky to work with a bunch of really great teams on a bunch of really cool products. There's a good chance, if you're in the ecosystem and have been for a little while, that you've used something that we've worked on, smart contracts that we've built. So that's sort of the maybe not so short story of my background. Sorry for rambling a bit there, but that's the gist of it.
Yeah, no, this is like the podcast is professional rambling. We want you to ramble so people can I'll cue you and I'll let you ramble. The less I talk, the better. But
all right, good. Well, you got the right guy then. I'll go on and on.
Yeah, no, I think you really hit on, and this is why I like highlighting some of the more technical, the builders in the space is like, for instance, like with ScopeLift, Open Zeppelin, like a lot of people are using this tech, but they have no idea who actually builds it, right? And ScopeLift is one of, the big players. And I really respect you guys. Like, obviously we work with you, but we've respected you before we even, teamed up with you for the Tally protocol. But I want you to go, if you could, a little bit back into like, you don't have to talk necessarily like what the type of work you were doing, but I want to get your thoughts behind like first principles of like how you started ScopeLift and like, the kind of the values you instilled from the beginning to make you guys so successful and gotten to the point you are today. You can dive into like pre-crypto as well, but, kind of like what has been, you've changed, like you said, you changed the type of work you were doing, but like what has stayed the same over the years that has kind of guided you to where you are today?
Cool. Yeah. So I would say there's two things. The first is I'm an engineer first, right? The reason I described like I first got interested in Bitcoin because I was interested in like, how does this work at a technical level? Like you can't have digital scarcity. That doesn't work. And so I found it from a technical standpoint, background in traditional engineering and aerospace engineering. So really my first principle with ScopeLift is to do the highest possible quality engineering work that we can do, right? And so we're a relatively small team, and that's because I have a high bar for the talent that we bring on. Everyone on the ScopeLift team is, just how do I say it? A stud, for lack of a better word. They're really good at what they do. So that high quality engineering bar is really important to me. And that's obviously because, there are a lot of reasons why that's important. One is because, you're building things where people's money is going to be at stake, right? And there's no takebacks. You can't just like ship a hot fix when you're talking about a smart contract. It's not how it works. And so you need that bar. Like that's super important. It's also just like the kind of things that I want to be working on, right? Like I want to be building high quality things. Like that's just, in my nature. So that's one of the core things that I've structured ScopeLift around. The other thing would be like really the values of the crypto ecosystem, right? Like, so there, two kind of things that kind of primed me for when I did find Bitcoin, really diving into it. It's like the engineering side, yes, but then also like being older, I was around during the early phase of the internet, right? Like I was a nerdy kid on the early days playing with all the early tech, like with, Usenet and with a bunch of different stuff that was popular back then, blanking on some of the terms. But so I saw that initial promise of the internet, and then I saw how that shifted as we ended up in this place where like a few tech giants sort of monopolized everything, right? So saw the initial promise of the internet, and then saw how that sort of faded with, the Web 2.0 or whatever you want to call it. And saw crypto as a way to sort of recover at least some of that initial spirit or the goals of the initial web. So the alignment with the cypherpunk ethos. The other thing is, as I was just describing, I became an adult basically right as the financial crisis was unfolding, right? The 2008 financial crisis. And so had to go out into the job market, luckily with an engineering degree and skills, but, saw tons of my friends, family, people in my life so impacted by what had happened in the financial crisis, and saw how our political and, the leaders of the banks and the finance, whatever, were never really held to any kind of account for that, right? And how fragile and centralizing and basically unfair that system was. And so sort of having those two things in my background really primed me to align with the values and the ethos of crypto. And so ScopeLift, I hope has that, inherits those values from me as its founder, right? Which is that we want to be building things that align with the core goals that the space has. And so, yeah, that's sort of that's sort of the culture that I hope to foster within the firm. And the kind of projects that we seek to work on are those that align with those ideas.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about those projects that we're working on, particularly, and we'll link all the ScopeLift information as well if anyone wants to dive deeper into some of the other projects outside of Tally specific ones. But I think we've teased it in the past couple episodes. This idea, that's not this idea, but this product Unistaker. Let's start from the beginning. Like, how did Unistaker arise, and then how has ScopeLift played a major role in rolling that out, and then we can talk about how we're generalizing that for the Tally protocol. But I think understanding what Unistaker is and how it's been built is important to kind of lay the groundwork for those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. So the credit for Unistaker really goes to everyone at the Uniswap Foundation broadly, and in particular, Aaron at the Uniswap Foundation. So he and the whole team over there has done an enormous amount of work, basically manifesting Unistaker into reality. And that's on the technical side, but also on all the, the social and regulatory side and the legal considerations and all that kind of stuff that has to be managed. And he's done enormous work getting the project to this point. ScopeLift was lucky to have worked with Uniswap and the Uniswap Foundation in the past as a client of ours, building some stuff for them, and was therefore lucky to have Aaron reach out to us to help build Unistaker. And so we wrote the smart contracts that basically are the on-chain portion of Unistaker. And as that hopefully gets rolled out and adopted by the DAO here in the short term, we're gonna we'll see how that plays out and what that looks like for the DAO. But the core idea of Unistaker, I'm going to say I'm speaking on my behalf here, so I'm not speaking on Aaron's or the behalf of anyone at the Uniswap Foundation. And, I don't have any particular, everything that I'm going to say is, either my take on it or my interpretation of things that have been said publicly. So if you go to the Uniswap governance forum, you can look up the post that Aaron shared when he announced Unistaker, and in the subsequent posts that he's shared since then, and the blog posts and things that they've put forward. Everything that I am saying is basically informed by and coming from those public things. But if I had to sum it up, I would say basically, Uniswap is a great project in a sense. It really demonstrates a lot of the things that I was talking about in terms of how the crypto ecosystem is different from the Web2 ecosystem. Here you have this project that is a really core piece of infrastructure for the whole space, right? This swapping primitive, right? And it is deployed as immutable smart contracts on the network. And where there are components of those smart contracts that are configurable, like, for example, the fee switch or parameters within the protocol that can be modified, those are controlled by a DAO, so a distributed network of token holders owned by basically the community, controlled by the community that owns this governance tokens that has the right to modify those things. And so it really encapsulates how crypto and the things that we're building in Web3 are different from what happened in the kind of Web2 paradigm, where that would have been a company that had total control over over this protocol or over this product, right? And that was very intentionally trying to create lock-in and network effects to prevent competition. Uniswap is anyone can enter or exit it very easily. You can go use a competitor without any issue, and it's immutable. And to the extent that it's controlled by anyone, it's governed by this decentralized DAO network of token holders that anyone can buy and sell, this asset that gives you the governance rights. So at a high level, Uniswap really engenders these sort of characteristics that I think are what I'm excited about in Web3. And then what is happening with Unistaker is a way to sort of make that sustainable and properly aligned, right? So, the Uniswap v3 in particular here I'm talking about, this will be true for future versions of Uniswap as well, has the ability to earn protocol fees, right? And rather than, taking those fees as, profits for a privately held company, instead, those fees can be distributed back to people who participate actively in governance, right? And so it sort of lines up all the incentives properly. It's if you are an active governance participant, then you get rewarded via these fees that are earned by the protocol, and you're incentivized to make good decisions for the protocol to maximize its health and well-being. And so really it's just sort of a relatively straightforward, simple way to line up the mechanisms. Now it's a first pass at that, right? And I think with the Tally protocol, we have some ideas of how that can be improved and, features and things that could be added to it. But as a first pass at it, I think it's a very good one. And I think that it's great that Uniswap and the Uniswap Foundation are leading here, because they've led in a lot of ways in the ecosystem. And, I think this is an opportunity to show how DAOs can be constructed in a way that is sustainable and incentive aligned, right? Like this isn't just decentralization theater, right? We're not just creating this token to dump on degens and pretend like we're decentralized or something like that. It's like, no, we're actually trying to create a system whereby this protocol, this immutable protocol, can be governed and maintained by a properly aligned and incentivized group of token holders who participate in the governance. And so I think that's the goal, both of Unistaker and then, of course, of Tally protocol as well.
Yeah, we talked, in the last episode, and I encourage if you haven't listened to the previous episode with Dennison, he really goes into depth on what Ben just talked about in terms of like the big picture alignment. Yep. And something I'm really honored to be working, like I'm always with Tally, and then the people like ScopeLift and other dev shops and DAOs we get to work with is we get to work with people like you, Ben, who have been in the space for so long, and even pre crypto just have, like you said, OG internet. You've seen this entire growth over the past 20-25 years, so you're really aligned on the incentive level, and you understand the history of everything, and what are dangers, what are the positives, like where like you guys are really guiding us towards the future. So I want to ask how much of the Unistaker rollout is going, how much of that is, I don't want to say an experiment, but how much of the rollout of that and what happens with implementation of that is going to guide the generalization of Staker? Is it a step one, step two, or is it an iterative process? How much do you think, and I don't want to say that means there's something wrong with Unistaker, but how much would you say could change in the next year as we start to see the rollout of Unistaker and then Staker being adopted by other DAOs? And what do you see as challenges to that as well? I know it's a very broad, sprawling question, but you can take that wherever you want to take it.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's lots that could be said there. One that I can't really speak very much to, just because it's not my expertise, is obviously there's a regulatory component around this. And so regulatory uncertainty, what happens with the election, yada, yada, all those things are going to play into it. Right. And that's just not my area of core competency. The Uniswap Foundation has shared a lot about their take on that. And, as not a lawyer, I can't expound on that, but obviously there are a lot of that is going to be one of the things that will shape the direction that things go. But I think another thing, like I said before, from a technical perspective, I think this is, so first of all, we built Unistaker for Uniswap and for the Uniswap protocol, right? So it is designed to solve the need for that project. Now, it's the mechanisms are relatively straightforward and can very easily be generalized, but so there's a certain technical a set of things that just at a technical level need to be handled. So just to give one kind of banal example is that for Unistaker, they're concerned only in staking with the Uni token, obviously, because that's Uniswap's governance token, and receiving rewards they chose the WETH or ETH. Basically, the rewards are distributed back in ETH, right? And that's because of the way that fees are collected in Uniswap v3 and the mechanism that was developed to aggregate those fees from all the different pools. There were certain trade-offs that were made that make sense specifically for Uniswap. So one very simple change that we can make to generalize this is allowing you to stake and receive rewards in different tokens, right? So, multiple tokens at the same time, for example. So rewards might be distributed in the native governance token, or they might be distributed in some other number of tokens, or they might all be consolidated back into a certain token. So the mechanics around which tokens are used to stake and which tokens are used to distribute rewards can be generalized a bit beyond the system that was initially designed for Unistaker. another example, which I think plays a lot into where Tally Protocol is going, is, what are the rules that are defined around what constitutes active governance participation, and how do we further sort of incentivize quote unquote good behavior, good participation in governance, and disincentivize, say, like governance attacks, but even just say using governance to sort of extract from the DAO as opposed to contribute to in a way that's positive sum and aligned with the growth of a given DAO, right? And so obviously that's at least somewhat subjective. It's certainly not a purely objective thing, but is there some combination of objective things that we can measure plus subjective things that we can sort of build incentive mechanisms around to properly assess, such that we can really hone in on again aligning and incentivizing quote unquote good participation, positive sum participation in the DAO, right? And that's something where Unistaker, this version of Unistaker took like a very minimalist initial approach, but there's a lot of room for us to sort of, iterate on that over time, create modules for that, experiment with different things and see what works and what doesn't. And so, those would be just a few of the areas where I think there's opportunity to generalize and iterate and improve on this foundation that Unistaker has provided. And I think that's, the direction that we're hoping to build with Tally Protocol.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of hinted at that throughout, and you've been hinting at it through the entire conversation, but I want to get your, this is kind of a hard question, but if you can encapsulate, like, why is this important for the future of DAOs? So we've kind of established, I think DAOs have kind of, stick in their, not to use the word stake, but have kind of established they're here to stay, right? This is where builders are coalescing, and this is kind of the vehicle in which, on-chain organization and activity is kind of moving forward. So like, why do you think this is important for the future of DAOs, and what makes you excited about the future of DAOs? Like, where do you see this in a few years from now?
Yeah. Really good question. So, man, there's a lot of directions that I could take with this. At a really high level, what I would say, like, part of my framework with crypto in general is that crypto is really like primarily a coordination technology. Now, a lot of people think of crypto as primarily being about like finance or money, but that's because I would say like money and finance are sort of like key pieces of human coordination. Like they are coordination technologies. And so in as much as crypto is sort of like taking coordination technologies and bringing them onto the internet in a digitally native way, of course, it makes sense that we're going to start with things like money and things like finance. But of course, there's all other ways that humans structure their coordination. You have all different kinds of companies, nonprofits, different firms of different sizes and shapes and constructions, and all the things that come along with those firms and the way that they're structured and ownership and all that kind of stuff. And so at a fundamental level, what I think DAOs are, like most really broadly construed, are it's sort of the next step in crypto, enabling coordination in a digitally native, internet native way, right? Like one way to think about it, and I don't, to a certain extent, I don't like saying this because I think it actually limits the way you conceive of DAOs. I think DAOs are actually broader than this. But one way to think of it is like a DAO is sort of like an internet native firm or an internet native company, like really largely construed. But again, like I almost hesitate to frame it that way because I think it's too limited. Like in the same way that you would say like, oh, with the internet, you can have an internet native newspaper. It's like, okay, like, yes, you could, but look how much like news distribution has been changed by the internet, right? It's not just like you take a newspaper and you put it online. In the same way, like the way that DAOs and crypto are going to change coordination writ large across the globe is going to be just as dramatic. So like, there may be DAOs that are going to look kind of like companies, but there's also going to be DAOs that look nothing like companies and yet sort of fulfill and expand upon the job to be done that a company fulfills, right? And serves, right? And so at a really high level, like that's what a DAO is. But when you translate something from sort of the analog physical world into the digital world, like the mechanics change, like things are different, right? And one of the things that changes when you kind of bring an organization from the physical world, like within a jurisdiction like, within a nation, right? Like when you start a company, you go register an LLC or register a Delaware C Corp or whatever it might be, and you're subject ultimately to the laws of that jurisdiction. And it's not just that you're subject to them, like obviously crypto is going to be regulated in certain ways, but it's also that like those laws and regulations sort of are how your organization, like it's like where they're ultimately settled, right? So if there's a dispute, like if someone does something malicious within a company, tries to steal funds or whatever, commits fraud of some kind, the way that gets resolved is by it gets settled in the legal system in the jurisdiction where you live, right? And with DAOs and with crypto writ large, we can't rely on that. Like that's the whole point of what we're building, right? It's not that crypto won't be regulated. It's just that like if something goes wrong with your DAO, you're not going to like resolve that by, taking the other person in the DAO to court, because that person might be pseudonymous. They might be in a totally different jurisdiction, right? So like ultimately we have to build these systems where the incentives and the mechanics stand alone in and of themselves and don't rely on some sort of extrinsic external factors in order to ensure that they function, right? Like it's the same idea of that like underpins like why Bitcoin is a good digital money, why ETH is a good digital money, right? Like you don't rely on some external actor, some jurisdiction or whatnot to settle those things for you. The network itself has to sort of be properly constructed to allow it to function on its own outside of those things. And so to the extent to which DAOs allow us to create, digitally native firms or organizations that are internet native in this sense, they also have to be constructed such that they stand alone. The mechanics, the incentives are aligned in such a way that they work. And as I'm sure Dennison and Raph got into in your previous episodes, right, we're starting to see how within DAOs, like that's not by default automatically the case. Like, right, just because you issue a token and allow people to vote with that token doesn't mean that the incentives are aligned properly, that that's going to result in good outcomes, that that's going to protect you from attacks, right? And so we actually have to construct these systems in a way that they are robust to, fraud, bad actors, scammers, but also just like self-interested, behavior in a way that is extractive rather than positive sum. Like we have to build these things to be able to withstand that. We can't, fall back to a legal system to enforce that for us or something like that. And so that's where I think, getting this stuff right is absolutely critical. You can't just hand wave it away. It has to be done. And people have to like think about how that works and come up with the mechanics and, implement them at the level of the smart contracts so that it works properly. And, that's what I'm focused on. Like that's one of the core things that I consider part of ScopeLift's mission is to make it possible for us to have these internet native digital organizations in a way that really works and that stand alone on their own merits.
That was a better answer than I could have ever hoped for. I think you really hit on it, like just getting this stuff right. And I was talking about it before, like I really want to hit home, like DAOs are in good hands. Like we have like some of the best the best thinkers in the space and best builders in the space building these solutions. And I have a front row seat to it. So I get to see it. And that's the goal of this podcast is to like let people like into kind of like the process of how this is getting built and how we're thinking about it. So that is an amazing answer. And thank you for that. I kind of want to pivot. Go ahead. Yeah. We ask this question to everyone. We have this 2-part question, but and we'll kind of wrap up. If you could change one thing about crypto, what would you change?
Oh man. Okay.
Magic wand. Magic wand. You can change it.
Man. Well, if I thought more about it, I might come up with a different answer. I mean, one obvious and easy answer, right, is that like, I wish in a sense, if we're talking just literally magic, like I wish you could just sort of wipe away like the scammers, the fraudsters, the people like that are, that do all this stuff that has given crypto a bad name. But in reality, I know, of course, that's not possible. I mean, going back to the answer that I just gave, like that is a part of human nature, unfortunately, right? That's just the world that we live in. And so the systems that we build have to be robust to that. Like we can't wish cast those things away. Like we have to build things, like we want to achieve good things with these systems. We have to build them in a way knowing that there are going to be scammers, fraudsters, people who would just attack and extract from these protocols. They have to be robust to that. So that's sort of like not a very good answer. I mean, honestly, another one, I mean, I also talked about this earlier. It's not my expertise, but that's sort of where maybe I would like to wave the magic wand, which would be on like the regulatory side, right? On the sort of like interaction with the legal system. So I talked about how like we want to construct these systems in a way that they sort of stand alone, right? But of course, the reality is that it's not as if, it's not as if we can just do that and everyone's just going to leave us alone to like, build a totally alternative system, right? We're going to have to interact with the legal system, the regulatory world. And of course, crypto has learned this maybe somewhat the hard way the last couple of years. Like those people are going to care about the things that are happening. And because that world is somewhat opaque to me as an engineer, it's a little bit like I would love for that to quote unquote get resolved in some way. And I know that that's not how it works and it's going to take time. But like if I could wave a magic wand and just like, oh, here's like here's how it's going to work. Here's how the legal system is going to interact with and work with, these new internet native organizations and whatnot. Like that would be great. And the reason I say that is because we have the privilege of working with a lot of really great projects in this space. And what I can tell you is that like literally without exception, people spend, projects in this space spend an enormous amount of time and energy trying to do the right thing, right? Like trying to comply, trying to, act in good faith. And similarly, like I know there are a lot of things that are really interesting innovations that don't happen, that get left on the cutting room floor because of legal and regulatory ambiguities, right? And meanwhile, the scammers and the fraudsters and the people who don't care and have no compunction about that stuff still go out and launch, or meme coins that they rug pull people on and do all the kind of scammy stuff that we see left and right. And so it's like the good people who want to innovate and create good things are constantly being drugged down by this uncertainty while all the harm that these regulations are supposedly, aiming at preventing still happens anyway, because the bad people don't care. They're, that's why they're bad people. And so if there was some way to like wave a magic wand and resolve that, I really think like it would unlock a huge amount of innovation and progress in a very short period of time. I think people would be shocked how quickly things might move if that was suddenly just magically fixed. I know it probably won't be, and it's going to take some time, but that would probably be top of the list of the things I'd love to see magically disappear if I could.
You're actually we've done like 55 episodes. You're the first person who's actually answered it that way. So it's not a bad answer at all. Like human nature, cool. Greed, scammers. So great answer. Cool. All right, let's pivot to a little more positive angle. What's your favorite part about working in crypto? What gets you energized?
Yeah, cool. I mean, I've already sort of talked about it like the whole time. Like first of all, obviously, like, I've drunk the Kool-Aid. Like I think what we're building here is super important. I think it's going to be the groundwork and the infrastructure for an entirely new means of human coordination that is internet native, digitally native, and is going to enable a lot of really, really great things, and also hopefully fix some of the things that we got wrong with Web 2.0. I'm not, a utopian. I'm not a idealist. I'm pragmatic here. I know that it won't be perfect, and there will be things that we wish we could do differently when we look back on how crypto evolved, etc. But I think net positive, it's very clear, net everything, it's very clear it's going to be a positive for the world, and it's going to be very important for the world. And so getting to help build that, build what I think is going to be absolutely critical stuff, and work alongside, some of the smartest, most motivated people I've ever met in my life. I mean, it's, I'm sure lots of people say it, but it's just true. It's like the crypto industry is filled with, like, it's truly the barbell industry in a lot of ways. Like it's like the smartest, most, good faith, genuine, like motivated people you've ever met on the one side of it. And then it's like the other side of the barbell is all the people we were just talking about, the scammers, the fraudsters, the whatever, right? And like, there's not that much in between, actually. It's really like, that's all you get. But getting to work with this side of the barbell, the people who are in it for the right reasons and motivated and just incredibly talented and smart, is just really awesome. Like it's just an exciting industry to work in, because you feel like you're building the future and you feel like you're doing it with some of the best people in the world. So I love it.
I love it too. Well, Ben, thank you for joining us to wrap up this 3-part series on the Tally Protocol. We'll have all of your information, ScopeLift information, the white paper for the Tally Protocol, stuff on Unistaker, and the show notes below. You're welcome back anytime. This has been one of my favorite interviews. So thank you for taking the time to give the people the tea on Unistaker, ScopeLift, your background, Tally Protocol, and looking forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks, man.
Awesome. Thanks, Tommy. Thanks for letting me ramble. I appreciate it.